The Rooted Lover. There once was a ploughboy that lived in England. He was red-haired and red-faced, and his hands were coarse from working the land. And he worked the land behind this beautiful palace. Over the hedge the wind blew sweet with the scents of 1,000 flowers, and through the hedge now and then he saw glimpses of all the colours of the rainbow, and sometimes the sheen of silver and gold tissue when the princess herself paced by with her maidens. Blackbirds and thrushes filled the gardens with song, and between these sounds was the airy, beautiful voice floating through of the Princess Fleur-de-Lis herself. When she sang, the birds suddenly grew silent. New flowers budded. Apples and pears ripened and dropped down at her feet. It's quite an impression her voice was having. And the ploughboy couldn't resist sticking his face into the thorny hedge, even though it scratched him, and fill his eyes and ears with the sight of the princess. Oh, he fell in love with her, but he knew he was nothing but a ploughboy and that he wasn't good enough for her. But over time, he grew more and more desperate. At last he said, "Okay, I'm going to go to the wise woman who tells fortunes and works strange magic and ask her to help me." So he took all the money he had in the world and went to the wise woman in her house. She lived by a dark pool, under a dark shadow. And he said, "Please show me how I could win the Princess Fleur-de-Lis to be my wife. I will give you everything I possess." "That is a hard thing," said the wise woman. "How much would you risk for it?" "Anything you can name," said he. "Your life?" said she. "With all my heart," he replied, "for without her I will die." "Then," said the wise woman, "give me your money and you shall take your own risk." "Now," she said, "pick any flower that you like and I will turn you into it, and then in the night I will take you up by the roots and replant you in the palace garden. And if, before you die, the princess touches you with her lips and lays you across her bosom, then you shall re-become a man, transform back again and win her love. But if not, when the flower dies, you will die too and be no more. So if that is a bargain for you, you have but to name your flower and it will be done." "Oh yes, with all my heart," said the ploughboy. "Only I want a flower that is like me, for I would have the princess know what sort of a man I am, so that she wouldn't be deceived when she takes me into her bosom." He looked himself up and he looked himself down in the pool before the wise woman's house, at his rough coat with its frayed edges, at his long supple limbs, at his red face and his black eyes and his hair gleaming at the top. "You know, I look like a poppy," he said. "What with my red hair and my rough coat and my life among the fields, make a poppy of me and put me in the palace garden, and I will be content." The wise woman stroked him and muttered wise words over him, and he turned before her very eyes into a great red poppy. His coat became green and hairy all over him, and his feet ran down into the ground, growing roots, and the woman got a big flower pot and spade and carefully dug him up of the ground and put him in a pot. She watered him well and waited until it was quite dark. When the stars hung above the princess's garden, the witch crept along the ground, picked out a spot in the flower beds, and planted the ploughboy, or the ploughman. Now the poppy stood up where she had left him, and he arranged his petals to be nice, and he was ready to show them off to the princess the next morning. He couldn't sleep, he was so excited. He kind of dozed a little bit. He found it quite pleasant to be a flower. The night was warm, and now and again little insects ran up and down his stalk, or he could feel a mole passing somewhere down beneath, under his roots. He waited for the morning, where he could win the princess's love and be with her forever. Morning came, and the gardeners with their brooms and their wheelbarrows went around sweeping up the leaves and taking slugs off the gravel path. Everything was neat and tidy before the princess came. The head gardener came and looked at the poppy. Who has put this weed here?" he cried. And at that the poppy felt a shiver of worry go through him, for if the gardener was to pull him up, how could he see the princess? The other gardeners came, and then they said, "Well, maybe it's a whim of the princess's. We haven't planted it. If we touch it, what happens if she gets angry?" So they left the poppy. The sun rose higher. The gardeners went away. The poppy stood watching. Then the princess came, and he caught her attention because she'd never seen a flower like him before, and his bright red petals. He was very hard to miss. "That is very beautiful," she said. He felt his petals burn under her gaze. "Why have I not seen that flower before? Is it so rare that there is no other?" "Oh, but it is so common," said her maids. "It's a common poppy. It grows wild in the fields. It's nothing special." "Oh, it's very beautiful," said the princess. She looked at it a long time. She half bent down. "Surely now," thought the poppy, "she's going to press me to her lips." "Does it have a sweet smell?" she asked, leaning closer. But one of her maids said, "No, poor little stuffy smell, not nice at all." And the princess drew back. "Oh no," muttered the poppy, watching her go away. "Why did I forget to choose a flower with a sweet smell?" He tried to remain brave. "At least," he said, "I will die looking at her. I will not faint or wither until I have no life left in me, and after all there is tomorrow." He went to sleep. He felt tired after staying up most of the night. When he awoke, it was the next morning. He'd slept all the way through the day, most of the day, and all the way through most of the night. And opening his eyes, on his right, he saw more poppies. Poppies in their hundreds, ablaze, a thick mass of red, burning the air around them with their beauty. What had happened? The princess came and stood by them, lost in admiration. It turns out the gardeners had heard the princess admire the poppy, and they had planted a whole bed of them to please her. And she looked at the poppies for a long time, but she didn't forget about the first poppy that had given her pleasure. And she looked at him also, but not for a long time, and he just thought, "This is impossible. He's never going to get a chance now." The days, they came and went, and the nights grew colder. The summer, it was changing and becoming autumn, and the poppies beside him began to wilt, and he was tired. It was so cold, he was holding up his little leaves. Whenever she came, he'd try and rouse his strength and stretch out his arms and look as good as he could. And the other poppies withered and died. And he kept going, because every day, if he could just see her once more, he believed he'd dream of her when he had died. Until he was the last one. He was the last spot of red in a whole garden that had gone grey. Even the other flowers had died off. Now it happened that at this time there was a prince who was visiting the court to kind of court the princess. So there was a grand ball in his honour, and the princess was expected to look her loveliest, and she would dance there with the prince and get to know him a bit. And she saw that there was one poppy left alive, and she thought, "Oh, how wonderfully that red flower has lasted." She said to one of her maids, "Gather it for me, and I'm going to wear it in my hair tonight." the poppy, he didn't know about the ball. He just realised that he was going to be in her hair, and he was thrilled. He almost fainted as the maid picked him up and carried him in. He lay upon the princess's dressing table, excited, and watched on the putting of her gown and the elaborate curling of her hair. And he still hoped that she would brush him against her lips and place him near her bosom. When the maid was given the final, soft, finishing touches to her hair, she took up the poppy, and he thought, this is it, herself. She has me in her arms, but then her hands. But then the maid took the poppy and slid it into her golden tresses. I shall never reach her lips from here, but I shall dream of her when I'm dead, and for a ploughboy, that surely is enough of happiness. So the princess went down to the ball. And the prince was very nice. He was very charming. They got on very well, and they danced, and they talked, and as they talked, they flirted, and she was toying with her fan, and then when she was moving the poppy, it fell from her hair at some point in front of them, and she saw it and picked it up, and she was playing with it and smiling at the prince, and she, without thinking, brushed the poppy gently over her lips to conceal her smiles, and then absent-mindedly arranged the flower in the bosom of her gown, in the neckline. And as she did, a strange look came over her face. "What is the matter?" demanded the prince. And there was such a commotion because the poppy suddenly sprang to the floor and turned into a man with no clothes in the middle of the palace, and the princess saw him, and she looked at the prince, and she realised she couldn't marry the prince, and she ran up to her room and locked herself in and refused to come out. "What is going on?" said the king, and he went up to talk to his daughter as to a strange and sudden refusal of the prince. The princess cried, and she wrung her hands as she said, "I don't know why, but I can't help myself. I can't marry the prince." The king was angry and said if she was not ready to obey him in 3 days' time, she would be turned out into the world like a beggar to find a living for herself. In the meantime, the ploughboy had been thrown out of the castle, out of the palace, and gone back home. For 3 days, the princess was locked up, and ate nothing but bread and water, and every day she was determined more than ever not to marry the prince. In her head was the vision of the ploughman with his red eyes and his broad chest, with his red hair and his black eyes and his broad chest. Well, because she didn't listen, the king, he went through with his word, and he threw her out into the street with nothing, with some rags on her faces. And she walked through the world, looking for the prince, looking for the stranger she had seen. And by the side of the road, was a lovely cottage with poppies growing around the door, and in the doorway stood a familiar face. A man with a tanned face and bold black eyes and flaming red hair, looking as like a poppy as it was possible for a man to look. And he opened his arms, and the princess opened her arms, and they ran together towards each other until they were locked in each other's arms.